Hello everyone, in this tutorial we are going to continue our Django series by adding endpoints to register our users. The first thing we are going to do is to create our user serializers because we are going to be working with our user model. So in our API application where we have our serializers, let's create a new file and let's call it users.py. So the first thing you're going to import is serializers from the REST framework. So from REST framework, we're also going to import our users model. So we can start creating our serializer. So class user serializer. This will extend model serializers from serializers. So serializers. The next thing is to add our class meta, where we can specify our model. So the model will be user, and we'll also specify the fields. We're going to have the ID field, we're going to have the first name, we're going to have the last name, and these fields are just fields in our model field, in our user model field. But you'll notice that we haven't explicitly specified our ID field, because Django automatically provides it in our users model. It's usually the primary key, which increments from 1. So when you create a user, the user will have a primary key of 1, and so on. The next one will have a primary key of 2, so on. All models in Django have that. So we'll have our ID, the first name, last name. We are also going to add the email field, the isStaff field, isSuperUser, date joined, and updated. So we can do that, and with that our user serializer is ready. So we can proceed to create our viewset. So I'm going to call it users viewset. The first thing I'm going to import is viewsets from the REST framework. We're also going to import our users model. We're also going to import our user serializer. Then we can proceed to create our viewset. And that should extend model viewsets from viewsets. And as always, we need to specify our HTTP method names. We're going to list the GET request and patch request. The patch will allow us to update users, while the GET request will be responsible for listing all users. So HTTP method names will have GET. We'll also have patch. We're also going to specify our serializer, which will be the user serializer class. The next thing to specify is the query set. The query set will be equals to user.objects.all. And with that, our user view set is ready. So we just need to register it in our routes. So in our routes, let's import our users viewsets. So from api.viewsets.user viewset import user viewset. But for consistency, I'm going to rename this as viewsets instead of viewset, because it will hold some more viewsets. I'm going to add the alias and rename our file, so you can just do that. I'm going to rename it to viewsets. That should be ready. So again, let's register our viewset. So routes.register. We're going to have users. We're going to specify the user viewset. The base name should be users. And with that, our viewsets are ready. So we can test that by first running our server. Let me navigate to that endpoint. So that should be under API.users. So far we only have 2 users, and we can navigate to an individual user. So we can go to our first user, where we have the first name Byron, last name, and so on. And remember, we had a patch endpoint, so we can update our first user. We can, for example, update the email. So let me set the email to byron123@gmail.com, and that will update our email. So as you can see, with very few lines of code, we are able to get all this functionality. There's one update I want to make, and that's on our ID field. At the moment, when we list users, we are using the primary key, which is very predictable. As you can see, we can just navigate to the second user, and this predictability can be exploited by malicious users. So the best alternative for this would be to use our public ID, which we defined in our users model. So I want to use this public ID as our identifier. So to do that, we are going to go to our serializer. We are going to set up a custom ID field. So ID will be equals to serializers dot, it will be a UUID field. And here's the cool part, we are going to specify the source. The source will be the public ID. We're also going to set read only to true. This tells Django to include the ID field in the API output, but it won't be included in the input or during create or making updates to our users. So, and with that, our serializer is ready. So we can test this again. So when we navigate to our user's endpoint, so you can see that it's using our public ID as our ID field. But when we try to navigate to our individual object, it won't work at the moment. I'm going to show you why. You can see it's saying detailed not found. It's returning a 404 error. So we can fix that in our viewset. We can override the getObject method, and here we are going to say our user will be equals to user.objects.getObject by public ID. And as you can remember, we defined this method in our object manager over here, where we defined this method, where we defined it as getObject by public ID. So it will take in public ID and return our user. So the next step is to pass our public ID, which will be passed in our URL as arguments. So that will be self.quags, and we're going to get the primary key, and we can return our user. So we can test this in our endpoint. You can just refresh, and you can see it's working correctly. We can update our email again, and yeah, it's working. So we have our user view set. The next thing I want us to do is to have a way to register users. So we are going to create a serializer for that. So next to our user serializer, we are going to create a serializer for registration. Register serializer, and that should inherit from the model serializer again. We are going to specify the class meta once more. The model should be user. In the fields, we are going to have the first name. We are also going to have the last name, and we are also going to have the email, and of course the password. Then we are going to override the parent's create function. The create function will take self and validated data. So this function will be responsible for creating our users. So we'll have user dot objects dot create user, and we are going to unpack our validated data. So we can have this in a variable called user, and simply return user. This is a very nice update in Python, this to asterisk, because otherwise we would have something like this, where we had our user updates.create and had to do this validated data, first name, validated data, last name, and email, and so on. But with this operator we are able to simplify our code. So I'm going to comment this out. So our serializer is ready. So we can proceed to create our register viewset. So class register viewset. Since our register serializer is responsible for creating our users, we want to be interacting with the user model. So that means we won't be needing our model viewset. Instead, we are going to use another viewset, and that's from viewsets dot viewset. The class viewset does not provide any actions by default. The actions I mean are this, which are the list, create, retrieve, update, partial update, or destroy. These actions come by default with the model viewset, but the viewset class does not provide any of these actions. We are only going to need the create function or action. So def create. This should take in self and request. So we'll have our serializer object, serializer, and this should be our register serializer. So let me just import it. You can just have it here, register serializer, and this will be register serializer. So our serializer is responsible for creating our users. So we are going to pass in the data, which will come as a post request, which will be request dot data. So the data will come as a post request in form of JSON. Before we save our serializer, we are going to check if it's valid. So serializer dot is valid. If it's invalid, raise an exception. That is true. If everything is okay, save our data. So that's serializer dot save. So after user object is saved, I want to return a response. Let's first import our response object from the REST framework. So from REST framework dot response import response. So we're going to return response, and I want to return some visual feedback to our user. So remember, we are dealing with JSON, so I'm going to have a dictionary there, and I'm going to have user, and here I'm just going to specify our serializer dot data. So we've specified our data. The next step is to specify the status. So I'm going to have status, but first let me import our status object from REST framework. So that's from REST framework, import viewsets, and also import status. And here I'm just going to have status dot http, and we want 201 created. So our create method is ready. Our register, and with that our register viewset is complete. So we can just register it in our routes. So routes dot register. I'm going to have it in the endpoint auth register and let's import our register viewset. Register viewset. Here we'll have our register viewset. You can have the base name as register. So we've registered our viewset. Let's run our servers and try to test this endpoint. So Python manage.py run server. So we are going to navigate to that endpoint, and that's under API auth register. So as you can see, we are making, by navigating to this endpoint, we are doing a get request, and you can see we are getting a 4 or 5, which is method is not allowed. We only have our the post and options method, because as you recall, in our viewset, in our register viewset, we only specify the create action, which is, in other words, a post request. So the best way to test this endpoint will be to use an API client. I'm using Insomnia. So over here we can just create a new HTTP request, and let's call it register. This will be a post request. Let's just copy our URL and paste it here. If we send it as it is, it should return an error. You can see we have the first name is required, last name is required, email and password is also required. So our body should be JSON. Here we are going to have the first name. I'm going to give my user the first name of, let me call them Mary. The last name, is going to be, let me have the last name of Joseph. Then we can have our email address, and that's going to be mary@gmail.com. We can have our password, and that's going to be testing. Let's just leave it as testing. Yeah, and that has created our user, Mary, Joseph, email, and our password. If we navigate to our users endpoint where we list all our users, we should see her. So you can see we have Mary, Joseph, the email is here, and the ID. There's one thing I'd like to update, and that is in our password. At the moment, you see we can just pass any password. We can even pass a single letter password, such as T. If we, for example, let's change the email, because the email should be unique. Let's have 20, and change the name to Mary 1, Joseph 1, Mary 1, Joseph 1, the password to T. It will create our user. But we want to have some kind of validation to our password. Preferably, the password should be at least 8 characters long. The password should be present, and the password shouldn't be too generic. Luckily, Django has these password validators that you can use in our project. I also don't want the password to be displayed in the output. This is a security concern. So let's fix that. Our serializer is responsible for serializing and deserializing our objects. So we can just update our serializer. The first thing I'm going to do is to set a custom password. So password, it will be more or less the same as what we did above here. That is going to be serializers dot character field. We're going to set it to write only, so that it's not shown in the output. That should be true. We're also going to set it to required. Required should be true. Then we're going to have validators, which is usually a list. Validators. For now, I'm going to leave it as empty before we import Django's validators. So the password validators, we're going to import the password validator from Django. So from Django.contrib.auth.password validation import validate password. So in our validators, we are just going to pass validate password. So we've set our password to write only, so it won't be shown to it won't be at the output. We've also set it to required, and we also have our password validators. So let's test that. Let's create a new user, and let's just have it as the first name. Let's have it as John. Last name John. It's going to be Doe. The email is going to be john101@gmail.com. If you try to pass an invalid password, it's going to return an error. You can see the password is too short. It must contain 8 characters. The password is too common. So we can pass a more serious password. Let's see, testing 3, 2, 1. That should work. You can see it has created our user, first name John, last name Doe, email john101@gmail.com, and the password is not being returned to the output. So let's navigate to our user's endpoint. I want to make some updates. I want to delete the user we created previously with the invalid endpoints. It was Mary1 Joseph 1 with this ID. So we can navigate to that endpoint, and I'm going to send a delete. So we are getting a 405 method not allowed. That is because in our Viewsets we only listed get and patch, so we can add the delete endpoint. So delete, and that should enable us to delete our user. So yeah, our user has been deleted. So that has worked well. Our register endpoint is working. You can see if you try to register the same user with the same email, it returns an error. User with the email already exists. So in this video, we've created our user serializer. We've seen how you can create custom fields such as the ID, the password. We've also created our user's viewset, and we've also seen how you can create a custom viewset using the viewset class. In the next video, we are going to see how to authenticate our registered users, and we are going to use the JSON Web Tokens, which is a modern approach to authenticating our users, especially when using our REST framework. So that's it for today's video. If you found it useful or interesting, consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing for similar content. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.